March 2006, Austin, Texas. Anthony Benesh walked out of a restaurant with his girlfriend and his 2 young sons. A sniper's bullet struck him in the head. He died on the sidewalk as his children screamed. Benesh had made one fatal mistake. He'd been wearing Hell's Angels colors in Texas. Texas was Bandidos territory. The question was, who ordered the hit? The murder investigation traced back to one man, Jeffrey Pike, national president of the Bandidos Motorcycle Club. But here's what made Pike dangerous. He didn't look like a killer. He organized toy runs for children. He posted vacation photos on Facebook. And for nearly a decade as president, he convinced federal prosecutors, the media, and the public that the Bandidos had gone legitimate. They hadn't. To understand why Pike lasted where others failed, you need to understand the club he inherited. By 2005, the Bandidos Motorcycle Club had burned through 4 presidents. Every single one had ended up in prison. This wasn't a coincidence. This was the Bandidos way. The club was born in 1966 on the Houston ship docks. A 36-year-old Vietnam veteran named Don Chambers looked around at the sanitized motorcycle clubs of Texas and saw something he despised. Polite society on 2 wheels, Chambers wanted something different, something dangerous. He named his club after Mexican bandits who lived by their own rules. No compromises, no society's approval. Just raw, unfiltered outlaw culture. The first Bandidos rolled out of biker bars in Houston, Corpus Christi, Galveston, and San Antonio. Many were Vietnam vets like Chambers, men with wild hair, scraggly beards, and tattoos covering their arms. They went by names like Revolver, Pecker, Deadweight, and Crankcase. One member earned the nickname Log Cabin because he drank whiskey straight from a log cabin syrup bottle. They weren't playing biker. They were living it. Within a few years, the Bandidos controlled Texas. They ran drug operations, prostitution rings, and illegal pit bull fights. They extorted money from roadhouse owners, and they made one thing brutally clear to every other motorcycle club in the state. Only Bandidos could wear the Texas rocker patch. That semicircular piece of fabric on their vests wasn't just decoration. It was a declaration of ownership. Other clubs paid tribute just to ride Texas highways. Then came the succession. Don Chambers went to prison in 1972 for a double murder near El Paso, a drug deal score that ended in blood. His replacement was Ronnie Hodge, a former Houston dock worker built like a grizzly bear. In 1988, Hodge and other national officers were convicted in federal court for conspiring to bomb homes and cars belonging to the Banshees, an upstart Dallas motorcycle club that had challenged Bandidos authority. The next president, Craig "Jaws" Johnston, fell to federal charges for conspiring to manufacture and distribute 1,000 pounds of methamphetamine. His successor, George Wiegers, went down on racketeering charges. 4 presidents, 4 federal convictions. The Bandidos needed someone who could navigate this pattern, someone smart enough to avoid the mistakes of his predecessors, someone ruthless enough to maintain the club's iron grip on the outlaw motorcycle world. In 2005, the Bandidos national officers made their choice. They picked Jeffrey Pike. Jeffrey Pike didn't start as an outlaw. He started as an altar boy. Growing up in California, Pike served at his local Catholic church. Clean-cut, respectful, everything a polite society wanted from a young man. But something about the structure, the rules, the expectations, it didn't fit. Pike found himself drawn away from the altar and toward the local arcade, where he could spend hours playing pinball. No sermons, no judgment, just the mechanical chaos of steel balls and flashing lights. In 1973, at 18 years old, Pike heard something that changed his trajectory. Texas had a legal drinking age of 18. He left California and landed in Texas with nothing but ambition and a thirst for something beyond the constraints he'd grown up with. He took a construction job, hard labor, long days, the kind of work that builds calluses and burns off whatever softness remains from childhood. In 1975, Pike bought his first Harley. That's when everything shifted. He started hanging around Bandidos, watching them, learning their code. The Bandidos weren't just a motorcycle club. They were a rejection of everything Pike had walked away from. No churches, no rules except their own. total freedom, no matter the cost. In 1979, the Bandidos officially invited Pike to join, to which he said yes. When Pike's best friend's mother heard the news, her reaction revealed exactly what the Bandidos represented to the outside world. She pulled Pike aside, terrified, and asked him a question that spoke to the club's reputation. "You're not going to kill me, are you? I heard new Bandidos have to promise they'll be willing to kill their best friend's mother." That was the price of the patch. The willingness to do anything, to become someone completely different from the altar boy who once served communion. Jeffrey Pike surely got into fights as a young Bandido. In one incident, he rode to Galveston with other members to beat up rival bikers, causing problems at a topless club the Bandidos controlled. Standard outlaw business, but he remained clean. In 1987, Pike pleaded guilty to misdemeanor assault. He'd stabbed a man during an argument at a party. He was fined $800. 5 years later, in 1992, he was sentenced to 20 months of deferred adjudication for illegally wiring his house to steal electricity from the city of Houston. That was it. 2 crimes, 2 minor convictions. For a Bandido, that wasn't a rap sheet. That was a resume for a corporate management position. Pike stood out in a club where presidents went to federal prison for murder conspiracies, bombing campaigns, and manufacturing 1,000 pounds of methamphetamine. Compared to the chaos that defined Bandido's leadership, Pike looked like a yuppie playing dress-up in leather. But that's exactly why the national officers picked him. The FBI had spent decades hunting Bandido's presidents. Every leader before Pike had fallen to federal charges. The club needed someone different. Someone who could smile at law enforcement, shake hands with prosecutors, and convince the world that the Bandidos were evolving into something less dangerous. One FBI agent would later testify in court that whenever they spoke, he always found Pike remarkably friendly, almost disarmingly so. The Bandidos bet that Pike's clean image would throw the feds off the scent. They were wrong. Under Jeffrey Pike's leadership, the Bandidos exploded. The club grew larger than the Hells Angels, larger than any outlaw motorcycle club in history. Pike commanded an estimated 2,000 members across 16 states, with 600 in Texas alone. Another 1,400 members operated in Canada, Europe, and Australia. Pike presented this expansion as evolution. He talked publicly about the club softening its image, about leaving the violent outlaw days behind, about becoming a legitimate motorcycle enthusiast organization that just happened to have a rough past. The FBI didn't buy it for a second. They watched Pike build his empire with surgical precision. They noticed his paranoia, his extreme caution about who he allowed into his inner circle. While other Bandidos presidents had been loud and reckless, Pike operated like a CEO protecting corporate secrets. He'd installed a screening process that required any member sponsoring a new prospect to have known that person for at least 5 years. In a world where undercover agents typically worked cases for 2 or 3 years maximum, Pike's rule was a masterclass in counterintelligence. The feds saw it for what it was, not a club going legitimate, but a criminal organization getting smarter. Pike wasn't softening the Bandidos. He was making them untouchable. But March 2006 changed everything. A man named Anthony Benesh made a fatal mistake. The Austin biker started wearing Hells Angels colors while riding through the streets of Texas. The Bandidos told him to stop. Once, twice. Clear warnings. Benesh ignored them. So the Bandidos decided to teach him a lesson. On a Saturday evening in March, Benesh walked out of a restaurant with his girlfriend and his 2 young sons. A sniper's bullet struck him in the head. He died on the sidewalk while his children watched. The FBI immediately focused on Jeffrey Pike. A hit this public, this calculated, this clean. Investigators knew no Bandido would act alone. Someone had to approve it. Someone with enough authority that a member would risk murdering a man in front of witnesses and children. Someone like the national president. But the investigation stalled. No witnesses came forward. No evidence directly tied Pike to the murder. The case went cold. filed away with dozens of other unsolved biker killings. Pike had dodged the bullet that killed Anthony Benesh, at least for now. 7 years later, the Bandidos had a new enemy. In late 2013, law enforcement started hearing whispers. The Bandidos were preparing for war with the Cossacks, a younger Texas motorcycle club that was, in the words of biker expert, aiming to gain notoriety. The Cossacks were doing the unthinkable. They were wearing the Texas rocker on the back of their vests, that semicircular patch that the Bandidos had claimed as their exclusive territory since the 1960s. The patch that symbolized control over Texas highways. The patch that other clubs had paid tribute to wear. The Cossacks wore it without asking permission. To outsiders, grown men feuding over a piece of fabric seems absurd, almost comical. But in the outlaw biker world, respect isn't optional. It's survival. It's the difference between being feared and being destroyed. The Cossacks had shown disrespect. The Bandidos would respond the only way they knew how. The violence started small. Then it exploded. At a West Texas gas station, approximately 20 Bandidos and their associates surrounded a lone Cossack. Then one Bandido pulled out a claw hammer and beat the man repeatedly in the head. The message was clear. Wear our patch, pay the price. But the Cossacks didn't back down. The confrontations escalated. In Fort Worth, at least 10 Bandidos stormed into Gators, a bar known as a Cossack hangout. They carried clubs, heavy flashlights that could crack skulls, and at least one gun. The scuffle was brutal and chaotic. When it ended, a member of a Cossack support club lay dead. To investigations, it would eventually lead back to the same question: who gave the order? The FBI already had its answer. They just needed proof. The DEA and FBI found their opening. Johnny Downtown Romo was a former national officer for the Bandidos who lived in San Antonio. He was close to John Portillo, the Bandidos' vice president, and federal agents had him cornered on drug trafficking charges. The agents made Romo an offer: wear a wire to his meetings with Portillo, and they'd drop the case. Refuse, and he'd spend years in federal prison. In the Bandido world, this wasn't just betrayal. It was a death sentence. Bandidos had bumper stickers on their motorcycles that read, "Shoot informants, not drugs," and "Snitches are a dying breed." Members suspected of snitching weren't just kicked out. They were brutally beaten. Their Bandidos tattoos were cut off their skin or burned away. Loyalty to the club wasn't optional. It was everything. But Johnny Romo looked at his future and made a choice. He put on the wire. Federal agents listened as John Portillo's voice came through clear on the recordings. "We're not going to f*** around with those Cossacks, dude. It's on. Our patch, our club, is at war with these." But Portillo said something even more revealing. He told Romo he planned to increase membership dues to cover legal costs for Bandidos, who would end up in trouble for fighting the Cossacks. He was preparing for arrests, for trials, for the consequences of what was about to happen. Then came the most damning statement. Portillo said he had informed the guy in Houston to turn his back from what I'm going to do. But who was the guy in Houston? Federal agents knew exactly who that was. Jeffrey Pike, the national president. Portillo was telling Pike to turn his back, to claim ignorance, to maintain plausible deniability while Portillo executed the war against the Cossacks. Pike could pretend he knew nothing while his orders were being carried out. May 17, 2015, Waco, Texas, Twin Peaks restaurant. 9 bikers died in what the Washington Post called one of the worst eruptions of biker gang violence in U.S. history. Bandidos and Cossacks opened fire on each other in the parking lot in broad daylight. Police intervened. The scene became a war zone. Jeffrey denied any involvement in the incident. He claimed he'd been laid up in bed recovering from surgery, but what the federal agents already had everything they needed. They had secret court orders to wiretap the cell phones of John Portillo and Justin Cole Forster, the national sergeant at arms in charge of enforcing Bandidos rules. and handling security. They were listening to every conversation, and they were squeezing arrested bandidos, offering lighter sentences in exchange for testimony about how Pike and Portillo really ran the club. The stories started piling up. Bandidos who cut deals with prosecutors told federal agents the same thing. John Portillo acted as Pike's buffer. He kept Pike's hands clean while carrying out his orders. But everyone knew Pike was in charge. Multiple witnesses testified that Portillo had told them Pike ordered the execution of Anthony Benesh, the Hells Angel shot by a sniper in Austin back in 2006. Pike had allegedly given the order. Portillo made sure it happened. Witnesses also said Pike had directed Portillo to send bandidos to intimidate and attack rival club members across multiple states. But the most damaging testimony came from those rare occasions when Pike himself spoke directly. Johnny Downtown Romo testified that Pike had personally told him to deal with a problematic chapter president in Australia. Pike's exact words, according to Romo, "I don't care what you do. Throw him in the ocean, do whatever the you gotta do." Not a suggestion, an order, with fatal implications. William Big G. Ojeman stood 6 feet 3 inches tall and weighed 420 pounds. In 2011, he attended a meeting at the Mason Jar restaurant in Houston. During that meeting, Galveston John, the Bandidos chapter president in Insainoy, Costa Rica, openly disagreed with Pike about an issue. Pike became furious. Ojeman later rode back to Pike's house with him after the meeting. He watched Pike's rage build during the drive. Pike turned down the radio and spoke clearly. "I remember him turning down the radio and saying he wanted Galveston John." Ojeman testified. He was pissed. He wanted Galveston John, the national president of the Bandidos, the man who claimed the club had gone legitimate, was ordering violence against his own members for disagreeing with him. The altar boy from California had become exactly what the Bandidos needed, a leader willing to do anything to maintain power. The FBI had a problem. They had wiretaps. They had testimonies. They had witnesses who placed Pike at the center of a criminal empire stretching across 16 states and 4 continents. But they didn't have Pike on tape ordering a murder. They didn't have him discussing drug deals. They didn't have a single recording of Jeffrey Pike saying anything directly incriminating. Under normal criminal law, the case would collapse. But prosecutors weren't using normal criminal law. They were using the federal racketeering statute, RICO. And RICO had something prosecutors loved: relaxed hearsay rules. Under RICO, the stories told by cooperating witnesses carried more weight than they would in a standard criminal trial. The U.S. Attorney's Office built their entire case on one foundation: the testimony of bandidos who had flipped, men who had betrayed their brothers, men who knew what happened to snitches. January 2016. Federal officers drove up to Jeffrey Pike's wrought iron front gate. A Christmas wreath still hung on it. Security cameras mounted in trees watched the convoy approach. Officers ordered Pike through a loudspeaker to let them in. At the same time, other agents arrived at John Portillo's San Antonio home. Pike and Portillo were arrested on racketeering and conspiracy charges. According to prosecutors, Pike had issued secret orders to Portillo about assaults and murders he wanted carried out. Portillo had then ordered certain bandidos to commit those crimes. The charges were specific. Pike had ordered the execution of Anthony Benesh, the Hells Angel in Austin. Pike had authorized a war on the Cossacks that culminated in the Waco shootout. 9 bikers dead, 7 of them Cossacks. The trial would begin in late February in federal court in San Antonio. The jury's names would be kept secret. They'd be bused to the courthouse from an unknown location, accompanied by armed guards. Pike and Portillo would sit at the defense table in dark suits, looking like harmless businessmen. But the prosecution was confident. They had wiretaps, they had testimonies, and they had 8 bandidos who had flipped. One by one, former bandidos made their way to the witness stand. They moved hesitantly, at Jeffrey Pike and John Portillo sitting at the defense table. These men knew what they had done. They knew the consequences. One witness testified that he had begged federal prosecutors to place him in the witness protection program. His reasoning was stark. "There's no way I can live in San Antonio after this. What I did is unforgivable." The prosecutor asked what he had done that was so unforgivable. His answer was one word: snitching. In the Bandido world, these men had committed the ultimate sin. They had broken the code. And everyone in that courtroom, including Pike, knew that their lives were effectively over the moment they opened their mouths. But they testified anyway. They told stories of Pike's orders, of Portillo acting as his enforcer, of a carefully constructed system where Pike maintained distance while violence was carried out in his name. The prosecution's case rested on the words of men who had everything to lose. John Portillo chose not to testify in his own defense. Jeffrey Pike did the opposite. He took the stand gladly. This was Pike's moment to do what he'd done for a decade: convince people that the Bandidos had changed, that he had changed them. Pike testified that his goal as president had been to attract different, younger people. More settled, I guess you would say. Mainstream members, family-oriented writers, men with jobs and mortgages and kids in braces. He insisted he knew nothing about beatings or murders. He denied sanctioning any violence against rivals or fellow Bandidos. And he was especially adamant about the Cossacks. There was no war, Pike claimed. In fact, he said he had personally told Cossacks leaders they could wear the Texas rocker patch. "I like it when everybody gets along," Pike testified. "I don't like drama." It was a masterful performance. Pike remained calm, reasonable, almost grandfatherly, the clean-cut president of a misunderstood motorcycle club. Then came cross-examination. Assistant U.S. Attorney Eric Fuchs began his cross-examination methodically. Question after question, Pike answered calmly, maintaining his composure. For most of the cross-examination, Pike held his ground, but Fuchs was waiting for his moment. He asked Pike to define what a snitch was. Pike's mask slipped, just for a second. His reply came out snide, dripping with contempt. A witness who makes up stories to get himself out of trouble. There it was, the real Jeffrey Pike, not the reformed president who liked it when everybody got along. Defense attorney Dick DeGuerin made his final pitch to the jury. There was no evidence directly connecting Pike to any assault or killing, DeGuerin argued. Pike was a family man. He was about to become a grandfather. The prosecution's case rested entirely on the words of admitted criminals who had made deals to save themselves. But prosecutor Eric Fuchs painted a different picture. Under Jeffrey Pike and John Portillo, Fuchs declared, the Bandidos had become the Mafia on two wheels, an international criminal organization that used violence, intimidation, and murder to maintain control. Pike hadn't reformed the club. He'd made it more sophisticated, more dangerous. The jury had to decide, was Pike a reformer falsely accused by desperate snitches? Or was he a crime boss who had simply learned how to keep his hands clean? Thursday, May 17th. After 2.5 months of testimony, the jury returned with their verdict. Jeffrey Pike and John Portillo were guilty. Guilty of racketeering, guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty of directing a continuing criminal enterprise. Cold-blooded killers, the jury declared. Guilty on all charges. Pike and Portillo remained stoic as U.S. Marshals moved forward. Handcuffs clicked around their wrists. The two Bandidos were led out of the courtroom without expression. Months later, on October 5th, 2018, they returned for sentencing. The judge showed no mercy. Jeffrey Pike, life in prison without the possibility of parole. John Portillo, 2 consecutive life sentences.
The verdict is now in. 2 top former Bandidos, National President Jeffrey Pike and ex-Vice President John Xavier Portillo, found guilty in a 13-count indictment.
Neither man would ever breathe free air again. Jeffrey Pike had followed the pattern. 5 national presidents, 5 federal convictions, the altar boy who became president, the clean-cut yuppie who built an empire, The man who claimed the Bandidos had changed. He was going to prison, just like all the others. Dick DeGuerin rarely loses cases. He stood outside the courtroom looking devastated. I truly believe Jeff is innocent. DeGuerin understood the mathematics of federal sentencing guidelines. Pike was facing life in prison without the possibility of parole. He would die behind bars, never see his wife again, never meet his grandchildren. The rest of Jeffrey Pike's life would be measured in concrete and steel. But Pike said something to DeGuerin that showed the other side of him. When we talked after the verdict, his biggest worry was about his wife, Heather. They had stayed in his RV during the trial, and he was worried that she might have trouble driving it back to their home. A long silence followed. Instead of worrying about his own future, he was worried about his wife's safety. The jury had decided who Jeffrey Pike really was, but even after the verdict, he made sure everyone remembered who he wanted them to think he was. Jeffrey Pike understood something his predecessors never did. Perception was power. He started implementing reforms, real, visible changes that looked good on paper. Pike banned Bandidos from calling their girlfriends property. He kicked out members caught dealing drugs. He removed others for what he called bad conduct. Then he made a brilliant symbolic move. The massive El Presidente patch that national presidents traditionally wore on their backs was gone. Pike replaced it with a small, understated patch over his front pocket that simply read, President. Lowercase. Subtle. When reporters interviewed Pike, he had his talking points memorized. "We are not your father's Bandidos." He painted a picture of reformed outlaws. Pike emphasized his own transformation. He'd married his accountant girlfriend. They took vacations on cruise ships and posted smiling photos on Facebook for everyone to see. But law enforcement called Jeffrey Pike Texas's Tony Soprano, a ruthless criminal who ran the Bandidos with an iron fist. One undercover agent with the Department of Public Safety warned Texas Monthly journalist Skip Hollandsworth directly. The last thing you want to do is get on his bad side. But when Hollandsworth sat down with Pike, he just shrugged at the allegations. Reports claimed he'd ordered executions of wayward Bandidos in Canada who hadn't followed club rules. Pike described himself as an ordinary guy, a divorced father whose 2 children attended the University of Texas. He woke up early, made his bed, walked his dogs, restored custom cars in his fabrication shop. He took his girlfriend, a certified public accountant, to the movies. He participated in weekend motorcycle runs with fellow Bandidos. Pike would argue that, why can't the feds just accept the fact that we are a bunch of bikers who love to get together and have some fun? 5 Bandidos presidents. 5 federal convictions. The pattern held. And in Texas, the Bandidos were already choosing their 6th president. But some of the most feared Bandidos aren't riding highways anymore. They're locked behind bars, where an entirely different kind of war is being fought. Click on the next video to see how their stories unfold.